The Pennsylvania race for Senate in 2024 is shaping up to be pretty competitive, and I've been saying this for a number of months now. In fact, I've been saying this ever since the midterms in 2022 because Dave McCormick is not your typical Republican candidate. Dave McCormick is a pretty formidable challenger, and he's certainly going to be the toughest competition Bob Casey has had in his political career. So we're going to talk about how this race is panning out so far, why the race is getting close, and why I think Dave McCormick is a strong challenger to Bob Casey, and ultimately how I think this race will end up going in November. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second, but first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So Bob Casey has been in the Senate since 2007 representing Pennsylvania. His first electoral victory was a landslide back in 2006 against incumbent Rick Santorum. 2012, he ran a few points ahead of Barack Obama. Of course, in 2018, he won by around 12 points. And then that brings us to the present day, where Bob Casey is only pulling ahead of Dave McCormick by single digits. Now, this is a pretty bad performance for Bob Casey because historically he has been pulling a lot stronger. And if we go back to his last Senate race back in 2018, where he won by around 12 points, as we mentioned earlier, Bob Casey was not pulling anywhere near his Republican challenger up until maybe the end, where he was up by around 7 points. But before that, he was up by a considerable margin. You know, Lou Barletta, the Republican nominee, was only getting around, 30% of the vote, 40% of the vote in a lot of the polls. Bob Casey was up by an average of at least around 10 points or so. This really wasn't exactly a very competitive election, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it turned out to be a safe Democratic margin. Part of that was because of the blue wave that Democrats had in 2018, but also part of it was because Bob Casey is a household name. His father was a successful, popular governor of the state. And, Lou Barletta was sort of a lazy campaigner, and that's something we saw in the primaries back in 2022 when he ran for governor. He really didn't put a whole lot of effort into winning that primary and ultimately came in at a distant second against Doug Mastriano. But of course, this time around, Dave McCormick is a much more competent Republican nominee. He has deep fundraising connections. He's a former hedge fund CEO, so he has a lot of big money behind him. And, Bob Casey also has to deal with the drag of Joe Biden sharing the ticket with him, because if Joe Biden loses the state of Pennsylvania by 2 to 3 percentage points, Dave McCormick has a decent shot at actually winning this Senate seat. Now, I think as it stands today, Bob Casey is naturally the favorite. Obviously, Pennsylvania is a Democratic-leaning state. Bob Casey is a 3-term incumbent going for a 4th term. He also has a big family name, and he has deep ties with unions in the state. He does pretty well in southwestern PA, historically a blue part of the state that has trended more Republican, but you have a lot of union blue-collar workers. And of course, northeastern Pennsylvania as well, places like Scranton, Allentown, Bethlehem, these historically Democratic voting areas that give Bob Casey pretty high margins. Now, we have more polling in the 2024 Senate race than we do the entire 2018 Senate race, and a lot of these polls have Dave McCormick only down by single digits. You have a poll by Impact Research that has it 48-44. Emerson has this Casey +4. You have the latest poll from the New York Times, Siena College, that has Casey up by 5. So, some of these polls are within the margin of error, but, Bob Casey is still the favorite by far. Now, one of the areas I think Dave McCormick is going to do significantly better than Dr. Oz is southwestern Pennsylvania. This part of the state is incredibly crucial because Republicans have been doing slightly better in northeastern Pennsylvania. Places like Lackawanna County, Monroe County, Luzerne County. These counties were decently Democratic about 10 years ago. Obviously, Lackawanna County, home to Scranton, heavily Democratic. Monroe County, sort of invaded by New York transplants, has been pretty Democratic since the turn of the century, and really since 2004, most Democrats have won this county. Now Republicans are pretty competitive here. Lackawanna County has been brought down to single digits thanks to Donald Trump, and Luzerne County has been essentially turned into a safe Republican county, although you do have a lot of residual union voters that could vote Democratic down ballot. And of course, Josh Shapiro against Doug Mastriano actually won this county incredibly narrowly. So while Luzerne County is a pretty Republican county now, there still is the tendency with a decent amount of voters to vote Democratic down ballot. This is an area of the state I would certainly watch on election night because I certainly think Donald Trump is probably going to do better than Dave McCormick here. McCormick's strength lies in southwestern PA and southeastern Pennsylvania, and that's pretty important because these areas of the state are the most populous. Southeastern Pennsylvania encompasses, obviously, Pittsburgh and the surrounding suburbs, which tend to vote heavily Republican, obviously not Pittsburgh, but the surrounding area. And then you have southeastern Pennsylvania, which has been historically lean Democratic and now is bordering on safe Democratic. You have places like Chester County, where George Bush was able to win back in 2004, now giving Democrats safe margins. Bucks County, which has been sort of a stagnant lean blue county that has slowly been drifting away from Republicans further and further. Now, typically Republicans win down ballot here, sheriff, other county-wide positions tend to be occupied by Republicans, but when it comes to federal and statewide races, Bucks County tends to be blue. Obviously, for some down-ballot races like treasurer, auditor general, it's a little bit different. Same with Chester County. Chester County tends to be a lot more Republican in some of those down-ballot races, but Dave McCormick is going to have to run up decent margins here and overperform Donald Trump if he wants any chance at actually winning here in November. So he's got to do really good in southwestern PA, obviously do better in southeastern PA, certainly better than Donald Trump, because I think Donald Trump's going to perform fairly weakly here. I think the areas where he'll do the best are obviously the central parts of the state, and then if he wants to win the state of Pennsylvania, he needs to do incredibly well in northeastern PA, perhaps win Monroe County, get Lackawanna County very close, because, Joe Biden won here by 8 points. Donald Trump only lost this county, I believe, by around 4 or 5 back in 2016. So those are sort of the benchmarks you need to look for. Monroe County was brought down to around 1 point in 2016. Places like Erie County, Northampton County are certainly important bellwethers. But you could certainly do a number on Bob Casey by tying him to Joe Biden. Now, that didn't really work in the midterm elections, but I think part of that is because Joe Biden wasn't on the ballot. Joe Biden is on the ballot this time around. Republicans' biggest challenge, I think, is actually getting Donald Trump to win the state of Pennsylvania, because as we're going to talk about in a future video that I've been planning for some time now, Pennsylvania is a very tough state geographically for Republicans to win, because the trends in Pennsylvania have certainly been against them. You've had Republicans doing a lot better historically in northeastern, southwestern Pennsylvania, but they're doing a lot worse in southeastern Pennsylvania than they've typically done. And southeastern Pennsylvania is a significant population center. The suburbs around Philadelphia, and while these areas have trended heavily to the left, and you've even seen some reversion for Democrats in northeastern Pennsylvania, you've seen southwestern Pennsylvania trending more Republican, but Republicans haven't really been able to get the perfect formula to win the state. In 2016, I think there was sort of the inflection point where Republicans had just enough support in the rural parts of the state and just enough support in the suburban parts of the state to win. I mean, you look at the countywide map for Pat Toomey, he's winning the bellwethers of Erie, Northampton County. He wins Luzerne County by around 8 points. He's winning Bucks County by around 5, Chester County by 2, and he's doing fairly well in southwestern Pennsylvania. Again, not nearly as well as Donald Trump did at the top of the ticket in this part of the state, and also in southeastern Pennsylvania to win statewide. In fact, he overperformed Trump, winning by 1.5. Donald Trump won by around half that margin. So it certainly is possible for Republicans to still win Pennsylvania with the right geography. I mean, you could even go back as recently as 2020, where Stacey Garrity essentially won the state of Pennsylvania by around the same margin that Donald Trump did back in 2016. She didn't win Erie County. She was able to win Northampton. She got Bucks County incredibly close, Chester County, I think, down to single digits. Those are sort of the benchmarks you need to hit, because these are heavily populated counties that are essentially bellwethers to how the state is going to vote as a whole. So, Chester County getting close, Bucks County, these are areas where I think Dave McCormick's going to do fairly well. Bob Casey will probably do a bit better in more blue-collar places like Lehigh County, Northampton County. So Dave McCormick is going to have to make up for it in southeastern PA. So it certainly isn't a very easy feat to accomplish, but I think the polls in this race give Dave McCormick a unique chance to actually flip this seat for the first time since 2006. So there is certainly a chance that Republicans can win here, especially if Donald Trump is carrying the state at the top of the ticket by 2 or 3 percentage points. Now, at this point in time, I still think that's unlikely. Dave McCormick has a lot of work to do, but he certainly has the fundraising connections. The RNC is certainly taking this race seriously, and I think potentially in the right set of circumstances, you could see a Republican upset here. But again, Pennsylvania is a difficult state for Republicans to win as a whole, even as the margins get incredibly close. Again, Joe Biden only won here by around a point back in 2020. And, historically, Democrats have typically won here by around single digits. But, going into 2024, the economy, foreign policy issues we've been seeing, and, of course, Joe Biden's low approval rating, I think give Republicans a unique chance here. But again, I still think this race leans in Bob Casey's direction. I think he'll probably win at this point by around 5 or 6. But, the potential for an upset certainly isn't impossible, especially if the polls continue to swing in Dave McCormick's direction. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Please give a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.